The French philosopher René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." Our thoughts are a powerful part of our existence. And today we want to look at what happens when those thoughts, especially negative ones, begin to run amok. What happens when our thoughts grab hold of our minds and put us in a chokehold and refuse to let go? And what happens when those thoughts begin to rob us of joy and peace and love and focus? And more importantly, how can we change the way we relate to our thoughts so that our minds are less a congested and noisy traffic jam and more a peaceful, tranquil stream? Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed Initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, John Lin, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Laura Harrison and Paul McMullen. Hey, y'all, welcome.
Hey.
Hey, John.
I'm really excited about our conversation today, but before we jump into all of that, two quick invitations. First, if this podcast has served you in any way, we would love it if you would leave us a review or rating or consider subscribing. And secondly, if you're looking for a therapist who is faith-based and clinically trained, we would love to help. The details are in the show notes. There's a valuable discount that you can take advantage just by listening to the show. All right, so let's get into this. Laura, Paul, in preparing for this, I got curious about how many thoughts the average person has per day. Do you guys have any guesses what that number might be?
Oh gosh, bazillions. But I'm ADHD, so they're going really fast all the time.
Okay. I thought it was the bazillions as well. I don't know if that's a real number, but it sounds like a lot, right? Because when I look at my own thought life, it can feel wild. But I looked this up, and one of the most credible sources of research on this issue came from a 2020 neuroscience study out of Queen's University. And they used brain imaging to track the start of one thought and then where it ended. And that's how they calculated their number. And what they found was that the average person has about 6,200 thoughts per day, which comes out to about 4 thoughts per minute. Which
seems like it's close to bazillion.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess if you factor in sleep time, that number goes up, right? And maybe if you factor in ADHD and other, personality factors, that number can change, right? But that was what they found. Now, here's the important thing. Some of those thoughts are unremarkable. Like, hey, look, there's a squirrel with a really fluffy tail. Not a big deal. But other thoughts can really affect us, right? They can really affect our mood, our other thoughts, our behavior, our whole day. Thoughts like, man, my boss is a real a-hole and I hate my job. That person rejected me, but I can't stop thinking about them. Or I suck. Why do I keep screwing up? Or God doesn't care about me. God's forgotten about me. Or what if something happens to my kids? What if something happens to my kids? This episode was actually prompted by a conversation I had with a mom whose child had been in a really terrible car accident. And it was a miracle that he survived. And she was sharing with me that now when she drives, she'll randomly have intrusive thoughts about something terrible happening to her children. And it can cause her just to cry uncontrollably right there on the car. And she asked me, like, what should I do? What do I do? Because it was causing so much distress. And so I imagine in your line of work, you see people all the time who are coming to you because some of their 6,000 plus thoughts a day are really affecting their lives, really causing distress, having a negative impact. And they have an outsized impact on their well-being. And so let me just ask the two of y'all, what do you see? What do you see when it comes to people's thoughts?
I'm waiting for Laura on this one because I feel like, especially with the example you gave, John, I feel like I've learned a lot from her. So what do you think, Laura?
Well, when you think about that mom and how that thought is coming back to her, and probably at times that she doesn't even want to think about it, right? I mean, I know having kids myself, that a lot of times moms center their identities in their kids, and they're I'm not okay unless my kids are okay, right? And so it's that for her, first of all, I would say that's super normal for that to happen. That was a traumatic situation that happened to her. But what I see a lot of times is like people have trouble like letting those thoughts go and actually just normalizing that thoughts are going to come whether we want them to or not, right? She can't make herself stop having that thought, but what she can do is notice when it comes, because what that thought is doing is it's trying to protect her, is trying to protect her child. A bad, really bad thing happened. And so a lot of times thoughts that come to us are about trying to protect our body and protecting ourselves, right? And so when you're in that situation that you have a thought, let's say it's an intrusive thought that you don't want to have, is the first thing I always tell people is like, that's really normal, because our thoughts are not us and they're not something that we invite. They just happen. That's the brain's job, is like to solve problems and look around and see what's going on. Its primary basis for what it thinks is our past experience. So when this bad thing just happened, it's going to be like, but what if it happens again? But what if it happens again? But what if it happens again? And so that's where the brain's actually trying to say, how can I prevent this from happening again? If I think about this enough, can I make myself safe? And so I think normalizing that this is a natural thing that the brain does to try and keep the body safe is the start of trying to like understand it, right?
Hmm.
And I guess from what I usually work with clients, you think about people coming in because they have anxiety or they have depression. We're referring to these symptoms and usually those are connected with an emotional experience, but they're also connected to certain thoughts. We're having anxiety about something, and that can be expressed as a thought. And so some of what I help people do is take some time, slow down, and connect to the feeling that they're having, the thought or the story that goes along with that feeling, and then the response that they have to that. So we'll have little acronyms, and there's lots of different ways to think of it, but you're thinking of a feeling that's connected to a thought that's connected or that causes a response. And so really people are looking for help in part because of certain thoughts that are connected to what they're experiencing in their life. And so, yeah, what we're thinking about and different modalities of psychology, some of them are very thought focused. Cognitive behavior therapy would be one that says if you can change your thoughts, then you can change your emotions and your behavior. And so thoughts are a big part of what we deal with when we're thinking about improving our lives.
Yeah.
I think when you think about your thought life, I mean, you can't control how many thoughts that you have. Like I couldn't say I'm gonna decrease the number of thoughts I have. That'd be really hard to do. But what you can do is create a different relationship with the thoughts that you have. See them through more compassionate lens rather than a condemning lens, or that they're absolutely true, or that they're saying something about your morals or about your relationships, that they're almost like a data point, right? And they may or may not be true. Not everything you think is true. And so holding them a little bit more cautiously rather than accepting them and just internalizing them is really important.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because um, I want to point out a tension that probably a lot of people feel is that, okay, my thoughts are really important, right? Like God talks about having a thought life that honors him and honors other people. And at the same time, we are not our thoughts. I think I heard you say that, Laura. Like, we're not defined by those thoughts. And so, what does it look like to hold that tension of, okay, I'm having a thought, but that thought doesn't necessarily define me? And it does make me think about Dallas Willard, famous theologian, philosopher who had passed away, but he was often quoted referring to this proverb that, our thoughts are like birds that can fly around our head. And so a bird may fly around your head, but you don't need to let it nest on your head. You don't need to let it create a nest. And I found that to be a really helpful image. Like, okay, a thought may come, but I don't need to let it create a nest in my mind. I don't need to ruminate about that thought. Can you guys say more about that, what that looks like? Because I think that's a very helpful distinction.
Yeah. One of the analogies that I use a lot in therapy is about how your body and your mind are just tools that you use to communicate with the world. And sometimes, well, almost all the time, as you move through life, those tools get bent and hurt in different ways. And the interpretation that you're trying to get across through those tools can be skewed because your tools might be a little bit flawed. Right. And the more you lean toward just letting the tools do what they want to do and not examine them, they'll get more and more flawed. So noticing like who I am, my core as a person is not my thoughts. It's not my body and my emotions. That's something different that resides behind there. Right. And so when you notice, like when you're talking about these birds, I think it's a really good analogy, because if you try to capture this bird and capture this thought and hold on to it, and it's not aligned with who you are spiritually and who you are as a person, it's going to fight against you. And so one of the analogies I use also is like a dream catcher. Like when you have a thought, is that thought allowed to flow through there, or is it getting stuck somewhere in that dream catcher, right? Because if it's getting stuck, it's probably related to some kind of trauma experience you've had or some kind of experience you've had in the past. It may not be big T trauma, maybe little t trauma that is causing it to feel uncomfortable for you. And so if you notice that when a thought comes and it starts to feel heavy and yucky, to be more curious about it and allow yourself to go like, what is that thought connecting to? Is there something in my past that's causing me to be more sensitive in this area? And really thinking about building in those pauses when you feel that tension in your body.
Another thing that I think about is when we're in conversation with people, whether this is therapeutic or otherwise, and we're just complaining about another person, or we're, like we're reflecting on our problems and we're thinking of it mainly because of what this other person or group has done. We talk about, this is another thing I've heard from Laura, the idea of people living rent free in your head. And so I do work with clients where the ruminating thoughts are, this person did this, and then this happened, and this, and can you believe this about this person? And I'll stop and sometimes just say, hey, do you know that you're giving this person power in your life, not because of anything that they're not forcing anything on you here. They're not forcing you to think about them, but because you are ruminating on this person, you are giving them power over your life. And I think that sort of experience, whether it's a person or it's something in culture or politics or whatever, and it's just running through our mind constantly, and we can't get it out of our mind. And in a sense, that other thing, usually something that we're saying we dislike, is almost controlling our thought life. And so just being able to reflect and think about, is that happening? Is that what I want to happen? And then, I think part of what we're going to talk about, what do I do about that? How do I stop
Yeah.
that? But that sort of rumination that's connected to discord in our life, and how that can be the ruminating thought, a person or a group or something like that,
Yeah.
or sport.
Yeah, sports team. I think one good thing to notice is if that's happening and you have someone that's living rent free in your head, or you have a thought that keeps coming back, or something that's getting stuck, is to really start to notice, like, what is it saying about me? What is it saying about my safety? What is it saying about how I feel about myself? Because usually those are connected to a self-worth. I've been violated in some way. I feel unworthy in some way. I feel rejected in some way. And if you can start to look behind, like, why does this person rub me this way? Or why does this event impact me so deeply? And try to, again, look for that origin story, that's going to help a lot. Because there's oftentimes all these things are connected. It's getting stuck with you because of some violation that you feel, right? Like if we go back to the story about the mom, she expects her son to be safe. And it's a violation when something happens to him that keeps him unsafe, right? And so then it goes back to that, okay, so it's my responsibility now to fix that and keep him safe. So that's where that ruminating thought comes from.
Yeah. Recently, I was battling a ruminating thought where I'm enrolled in, I'm taking online classes in this MBA program. And I turned in there was a problem I could not figure out. I knew my answer was wrong though, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And so finally time ran out and I turned it in. And as soon as I pressed submit, I was like, I figured it out. And I knew exactly what I did wrong, but it was too late because it was already submitted. And oh my gosh, I kept on ruminating over about like, what's wrong with you, John? How could you make such a stupid mistake? And the inner critic was in full force, and I kept trying to tell myself, it's okay. Like, we all make mistakes. And so I was doing this battle because I know I've now been doing my own work about my thought life. And so I knew, like, don't beat myself up for this mistake, and don't beat myself up for having the ruminating thought. Like, get curious about it and approach it with more acceptance. And man, it was a battle. It was a battle to do that. And there were some moments where I had peace and I was like, okay, I can let go of this. I realized that I'm attaching a lot of significance to my grades, right? That's part of my story, and that's coming back, and then naming it helped. And then I'd have some peace for a moment or a couple hours, and then it hit my mind again, and I'd think, oh, dang it, but as if only I hadn't, if only I had figured out the solution the first time. And so there was a lot of self-talk that was required. But what was a little bit different this time was I did try to approach that ruminating thought with more compassion and curiosity. And in time, that did help me to release it. That's a very different posture than some of us have come from, where we're like, okay, if you have a thought that you don't like, you got to slay that thing. Like, get rid of it. Stop thinking about that. Stop thinking about that lustful thing. Stop thinking about that person who, angered you. But it only just fuels the fire, right? And so there's an irony there that I think escapes a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about that, it's like I think about like clients that I have that struggle with addiction, and especially addictions that are more hidden, like pornography. But because that need to get that urge taken care of or fixed, when you have that thought of like, I need this, like even when it comes down, I need to have a good grade, right? If you can think, okay, so yeah, I do need that. I need to have that connection. I need to have that fulfillment. I need to know that I'm successful. I need to know that I can achieve, but I'm trying to fulfill it in this unhealthy way, right? But to be compassionate with yourself and go, yeah, because that's how I've known to get that need met. I've known that if I do this, I know for sure that need's going to get met. I'm going to feel bad about myself afterwards. I'm going to be beating myself up about it, but I got my need met. Right. And so what if we can be softer and kinder to that person that's wanting to get the need met in a healthy way? Like even with yourself, when you talk about that compassion and curiosity, being like, yeah, that person that wants to go and lean toward that unhealthy coping mechanism is hurting. I'm hurting right now. I want to get this taken care of quickly and easily, and I can't. And just allowing yourself to be more compassionate and soft, even when it's something that you feel is shameful or bad.
That is so, I think, that is counterintuitive for many people, to approach the thoughts that we don't like with compassion and curiosity. Because most of us, when we have a negative thought that we don't like, or we think it's against our morals or values, we feel shame about that and we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. But what I hear y'all saying, and what I've experienced myself, is the key shift in how we relate to our thoughts is to approach it with compassion, to move towards, and that moving towards can, in effect, actually help release the very thought we're trying to be free of or move on from.
I want to add to that. Laura, you mentioned safety earlier. And I think it's not like when you're saying treat yourself with kindness and curiosity, we're not trying to say, oh, that thought that you may be feeling is not that bad. I mean, you could be thinking a self-harm thought. You could be thinking a harm somebody else thought, like the thought,
Right.
we're not saying, oh, that's a sweet little, like treat it sweetly. But we are talking about the fact that you are having a thought. Can you soften a little bit towards that reality? But if someone's listening to this and thinking, whenever I am in that mode, I don't have the capacity to soften towards that. I don't have the capacity to think, where's that coming from in my story? Which is what we're saying we think it would be important to do. This is part of the reason why being able to regulate yourself, to find safety and groundedness in your nervous system and your heart and soul and mind and body are really important. And so like in your example, John, it's you're kind of talking yourself down. You're trying to say like, hey,
Right.
it's going to
Right.
be okay. This isn't the biggest deal in the world. I'm going to be okay in my grades, and you're wrestling with that. But there's a lot of times where we really do, like, we were created to both connect with God, but also to connect with other people. And there's times where the thing that we need to do is to be able to bounce our insecurity and our thought off of another person and to receive their holding that thought with us. If it's especially if it's a grief or it's a sadness, if they can find someone that will just be with us in that thought, or if it's an anxiety or a question about ourselves, for them to give us that assurance and say like, hey, I know you're going to be okay, to give us some perspective, and for us to be able to relax in feeling their comfort and their regulation. So just want to say that, like, as we're thinking about what do we do with those thoughts, vulnerability
Hmm.
with other people and being able to find safe people that you can share your stuck thoughts with is really helpful. And we were built to be able to meet each other in those places and help to find that sense of calm and safety within ourselves. And yeah, that's a plug for therapy, but it's just a plug for the idea that that's what we need in our relationships, is to be able to talk through some of this stuff with other people.
I love that, Paul. I think sharing with another human being, in addition to our prayer life, is such a powerful balm to our souls, to our thought life. And yet, I think a lot of times we experience it where we tell someone something vulnerable and then they immediately jump to fix it or problem solve or analyze it. And you're like, freak, I shouldn't have shared that with you. So, can you give some tidbits about how would you approach that with someone? What are some things you can ask for so that you can get what you need in that moment?
Yeah. So this is a thought for the person doing the asking, and then also for all the rest of us when people come to us with thoughts. So many of us, especially if we feel like we have experience or knowledge about a particular experience somebody's having, we want them to have the good knowledge that we have. And I would just ask, please pause that response. Please wait for a moment and listen and really tune in to what the other person is saying. One question that I think is helpful on both ends is to say, what do I need right now? What would be most helpful to me right now? And so to ask yourself that question and to say, this would help me feel better if, you know, this would help me feel safer if someone could just be there to listen, if someone could tell me I'm not crazy right now, if I knew that I was not the only person struggling with this. Those are all different relational needs that you could ask and say like, hey, have you ever been in this situation before? Am I crazy? Is this okay that I'm even thinking that? Or we were talking about our struggles, addictions, sins, and to be able to say, this is something I feel a lot of shame about. This is something I've done. And I just need to know, like, what does that do for me to share that? What does that do to our relationship? And to receive grace and acceptance from another person to say, like, hey, I'm still for you. I'm still in this with you. That's
Yeah.
very deeply meaningful, but also it does something to our nervous system to let us know we're going to be okay. So asking that question, what do I need? What would be most helpful to me right now? And then on the flip side, being able to listen for what someone else needs. And rather than jumping for the solution, this is the classic, the guy jumps in to fix the problem and the girl is like, I just want you to hear what I'm feeling. And,
Right.
but it definitely goes with any relationship,
Yeah.
um, just to slow down that fix it problem. And here's part of here's one reason I say that. A lot of times it's not that the person can't figure out what they need to do. It's that we're in our protective brain. Our protective brain is not our problem solving brain. We're not executive functioning when we are in our fight or flight response. And so what the person doesn't need when they are freaking out or really depressed about something is someone giving them the steps, the executive functioning steps to take They need someone that's there to help soothe and comfort and be with them and what they're experiencing. And as they feel safety and that part of their brain can relax, then they can be more open to to a solution. So if you're jumping in to fix people's problems, they might even listen to you and then walk away and not be able to do anything with it because they're still in that protective mode. So if you want to be helpful, you've got to think about safety and comfort first, and then you can move towards problem solving.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you think about that safety and protection fight or flight brain as like almost like a toddler. It reacts like a toddler. It wants what it wants. It wants to be heard. It's going to be loud. It has lots of big emotions, but it doesn't know what to do with them. And so when you see a toddler throwing a fit, if you go, now if you would have just not done that, da 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 da, what is it? They're not even gonna, they're just going to scream louder, right? But if you get soft and you get small and you sit on the floor and you wait and you invite, they're much more likely to soften because what do they need in that moment? They need, like Paul said, safety and security. It's their two primary things that they need more than anything else. And at our core, all of us still have that toddler there going, will somebody just pick me up and hold me?
Yeah.
It was funny. My son recently moved to Breckenridge to become a ski instructor, and we're talking on the phone, and he said, "You know, Mom, sometimes you just got to pick those little kids up. They just need to be off the floor."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Yes, they do. They just need to know that it's not all on them anymore, and that somebody else is there to hold them too, right?" And I think that everybody needs a little bit of that, you know. And so if you can lead with empathy first, and then when you see that relaxing, say, ask permission to help go into fix it mode. Is it okay if I offer a suggestion? You know, I've been hearing what you've been saying. I hear your struggle. Are you in a place now where you could hear maybe a little bit of advice? And it's okay if you're not.
Right. Yeah. That's it's really great because if the person was like, no, I'm not in a place. I don't want your advice. And you're like, well, I'm going to give it to you anyways. Who's the
Yeah.
like who's the fool in that relationship, right?
Yeah.
And yet I do that all the time because I want to fix it, but I don't want to be a fool. And so
Well,
I
you're
think
looking to relieve your anxiety.
that's right.
You
That's
want
right.
if you can get that
Yeah.
fix over there, they'll
Get
be
that. Yeah,
good.
that's
And
right.
then you don't have to think about that they're in that place anymore because
That's
usually
right.
these are people that you care about.
Right. It comes from a good place. It comes from a good intention, but often it's misguided. No conversation about thought life from a faith perspective would be complete without bringing in 2 Corinthians 10. And I'm guessing you guys probably know this. I memorized this verse when I was in high school and I really liked it. And those of you, you're like 2 Corinthians 10, what does that say? Is that verse that says, take every thought captive? Y'all know that one? The full verse is, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Now, I remember coming across that verse when I was reading the Bible, and I loved it because it was very action oriented and very, I had this like feel of conquest. I'm going to take my thoughts captive and I'm going to make them subjugate them to the lordship of Christ, right? That was kind of how I was thinking. And as a high schooler who was wrestling with all sorts of thoughts that were swirling through my mind, right? Thoughts about my future, thoughts about academics, thoughts about girls, lustful thoughts, and thoughts about my identity. I really took this seriously. And yet I don't know how successful I was trying to live this out. And so I would love to hear your perspective. Both of you are Christians, but as mental health practitioners, how would you, because a lot of people hear this verse, I want to take every thought captive, but how would you nuance that from a mental health perspective? And I know we already have been. We've been talking about some things, but let's integrate that a little more.
And to connect to what we were saying earlier, part of the challenge is just to notice that there's more going on than just a brain having one thought every 15 seconds, right? We're not just brains that are just thinking thoughts. We're experiencing the world. We have emotional experiences. Our body is experiencing things. I mean, sometimes I think crazy thoughts and then I go and have a good sleep and I feel a lot, I stop thinking those thoughts the next day. Or, I have a good meal and I feel better, I'm not thinking the same way. So we're beings that are created, mind, body, soul, emotions. And so that's important to think about. I do think I think that there is something to be said for we are not our thoughts, which Laura mentioned earlier. And I think there are ways that we can train ourselves. We can go into training, not just physical training, but mental and emotional training, which we've talked about before, mindful practices where we practice being with ourselves and letting thoughts come up, letting feelings come up, and then letting them go and coming back to breathing, to meditating on something that is good and true. And I think that that is a really important practice so that you can have a thought and not automatically equate that with that's true and that's true about me and that's true about the world and I'm going to freak out or I'm going to go do this in response. To be able to have a relationship with your thoughts where you're able to weigh that a little bit more and you're able to discern. And I think, one image that I think might be helpful is that image you talked about. I forgot exactly how you said it, John.
Birds?
Well, the birds, but
Huh.
the idea of I've got these thoughts and there is a sense in which I want to submit those thoughts to God. And I think there's a way of even imaging that for those people that are more visually and use their imagination is the idea of almost picturing the cross and kind of laying your thoughts, at the cross and letting that be a lens through which your thoughts are shaped so that you can if you think of that as your highest value, if you're seeing the world through the lens of a life that's transformed by the cross, by Christ, to submit your thoughts in that way to him, I think that can be really big. I think that's more of a meditative practice still, and maybe it's harder to do on the go in the fly, but I think that's something that people can think about is how do I create distance by practicing mindfulness, meditation, prayer, where thoughts come up, but I don't allow myself to return to the practice. And then when I am noticing my thoughts, how can I submit those to what I value the most and test it and see where it stands.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when I heard you talking about it, John, about how you related to almost the aggressiveness of that practice, right? I'm
Yeah.
going to take it captive and I'm going to subdue it and I'm going to be in control of it when
Right.
really we have very little control. We have actually probably zero control about the thoughts that actually come into our minds because we're not really, you're not consciously, sometimes I'm going to think about this, but most of the time they just come. They're like just, one of the therapists I work with here talks about like ducks on a pond just floating in front of you, and you can't control the ducks. They're going where they want to go, but they're just going to come in front of you, and you may not like that one. But if you think about your thoughts as something that is not you, that is a really important concept. And then I get to choose. I think if you think of taking it captive, like I get to choose whether I'm going to bring this one in and make it part of me, or I'm going to release this one to go float away. Okay. Now, which of these ducks am I going to take home with me? Right? Do I want to take the duck home with me that says I'm a bad person because of XYZ? I might need to have some reflection on that. But a lot of times when they're coming from that convicting type of point of view, I would say, okay, I may not want to take that duck home, but maybe I want to take a duck that's a little bit different, that I rephrase a little bit and think about it in a little bit different way and make sure that it's grounded in truth. Is this thought grounded in truth? Does it align with my core values of who I am? Does it align with who I believe God wants me to be? And if I can get there, then I say, okay, I'm going to take this one home.
Hmm.
Right. But again, like Paul said, that takes time. And a lot of times, and believe me, I do not do this perfectly either. I mean, sometimes I'll find myself ruminating on a thought for days and days before I finally go, wait a second, why is this one sticking with me so hard?
Yeah.
Right. And giving yourself the time when you notice it to say, what is going on with this one? Why do I want to take this one home? And is this one I really should just release? Or do I need to reframe it somehow so that it actually does align with me and fits better?
That's good. That's really good. So, I mean, just to make it crystal clear, because I think it's so helpful, what we are saying here is our thoughts do matter. They are very important. They are part of who we are. And you are not your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
There is a distinction, a very important distinction. So thoughts may come and go like the rubber duckies, but there's always a critical choice that we make about what we do with that thought. And so when we grab onto that thought and bring it in, I like that imagery of like, bringing it in or treasuring it. That's a choice that we can make. And so whether that's, that, oh, my boss, my spouse, that initial thought, that happens. But when we begin to make a checklist of all the ways they've wronged us, now that's a choice that we've made to bring it in, right? And so that's the critical distinction. And Paul, I love that imagery too of, okay, I have this thought and I want to release it. I want to bring that before Christ because I know that's not something that I want to hold to myself, or I'm not even sure. And I want to bring that before God and allow him to help me get curious about what might be there. One question I have for you also, there are some thoughts that come and really we just need to let them pass because they're just, maybe they're wild thoughts, maybe they're gross thoughts to us, they're very distasteful to us. And then there are other thoughts that we can't seem to let go, right? We keep ruminating about it. So I've heard y'all talk about there's this difference between letting go of a thought and then getting curious. And so getting curious means I'm going to do a little more thought work and what other emotions or story is being attached to this thought. And that's a little different than the letting go, right? So when do you know which to do? Because I've had that question in my mind. People are like, what are the thoughts I just need to let go and just whatever? I don't need to think about it another second. And what are the thoughts where I need to do a little more work to uncover the deeper meaning? Does that make sense?
One of the things that I talk to people about too is like branching it out into like so you have this thought or something happened and then you get a thought about the thing that happened or you have a thought that comes. So now I need to take this thought and analyze it. And how do I decide if I'm going to keep it, if I'm going to let it go, or if I need to be curious about it? The filter I usually tell people to run that through is it true? Do you feel like it's true, untrue, or you're unsure? When you can run it through those filters, it creates your ability to say, okay, so if it's true, there's probably something I need to take accountability for here. There's something I need to examine here. If it's untrue, then I probably need to release that and not allow that thought to enter into or if it doesn't align with who I am. But if I'm unsure about it, then I probably need to get wisdom from other people about it. I probably need to look outside myself and say, hey, have I heard this before from a lot of people about me? Or has this been something that's been reoccurring over time? And maybe I should ask for wisdom from a really close, trusted friend and say, hey, I'm noticing this coming up a lot in my life. Is there something that you've noticed in me too? Right. And so that's kind of one of those ways I would say, how do you figure out which direction to go with it is to filter through that true, untrue, or unsure.
If there's a thought that keeps coming up and it is, let's say that you do feel like it's negative. So you think like, oh, I want to get rid of this thought, but it keeps coming up. I think there's a place for thinking about what is going on here. What are the emotions connected with it? Doing a little bit of analysis, but again, almost stepping back scientifically and trying to get a little distance between you and the thought and do a little analysis of what's going on, where's it coming from? Because if you're imagining trying to put the thought away, but it feels like no matter whatever that looks like, laying it down before the cross or just not thinking about it anymore, letting it float away, but it keeps
I had
floating
a
back.
earlier of a lot of ducks sitting in the bottom of the cross.
Yeah, what if that mean duck just keeps coming back and quacking at you, right? I think that's a good time. It's not that you don't want it to go away, it's that it won't go away. And that's when an analysis of how does this connect to my story in a way that, why is this coming back into my mind over and over again? Why is it significant to me? And trying to understand it from that end. And it really could be a reason to get some help whenever you feel stuck in that. Let's say you've gone and you've talked to trusted people about it and it's still there. And so you might feel like I need to do some analysis if it's not a pleasant thought, but it keeps coming back over and over again. I think what Laura was saying about the discernment piece is really important too, because there's a lot of thoughts we're not sure where does it fit? Do I need to keep thinking about this or not? I remember as a teenager having this insecurity in my mind that whenever people were kind of whispering and snickering, like I'd see these two girls whispering and snickering to each other, and I was sure they were laughing about me. Like I was just certain that they must be talking about me. And so what do I do? What do I do with that thought? If somebody just said, well, just stop thinking about it. It might have been hard to do, but being able to analyze what's going on here and then being able to bring in some right perspective, which is people are not thinking about you all the time. Like you are not the center of the universe. They're not thinking about you negatively, but they're not thinking about you positively.
Sure.
It's like you're not the center, and that's okay. And having some work on that underlying insecurity would have helped me release that thought. So that's just, there's a lot that goes into this, and it depends on what the circumstance is. But I do think there's reason to do that analysis from time to time.
Yeah, yeah. I see that we're about out of time. And so I wanted to ask, is there anything y'all want to say as we wrap up here?
I mean, I would say that I think it's important to build a practice for yourself of analyzing your thoughts and like really be aware. I think it's important when you have an intrusive thought to externalize it, write it down, because when you keep it in your mind and you don't externalize it, say it out loud, write it down, name it, it's going to be harder to resolve it if you don't externalize it. So name the thought. Say, this is an intrusive thought, or this is a fear. It's not something that's for sure that's going to happen. It's a fear that I have for the future. And then really grounding yourself what is true in the moment. Really thinking about, okay, so what is actually true right now? So, for example, if I was going to name what was true right now for me, I'd be like, okay, I am sitting in my office. I am talking to two people who I know care about me and want the best for me. I'm worried about some things, and there are things that I can't control. But right now in this space, I'm safe. And so really allowing yourself, and not everything that's true in the moment is going to be positive, but the more you can ground yourself in the present moment, you're going to feel more stable. Anything you'd add?
Yeah, in what we're saying, we're we're not in control of most of the thoughts that just show up in our thinking. But one thing that we are in control of to some degree is what we put ourselves around that does come into our mind constantly.
Hmm.
And I think this is a plug for saying we have a choice about what we put into our mind, the thoughts that we are surrounded by all the time. And that does have an impact on what you will think.
Yes.
If you are struggling with sleeping because you have, bad dreams at night, might know somebody in our household that has this, and you have, you're scared of certain things. If you keep inputting that in front of your face, then you will continue having those thoughts. And so think about what you put in front of you, what you're inputting into your mind. That is going to shape your thoughts. It is going to shape what is coming into your mind that you have to make those choices about. So um, this is
Hmm.
more about discipleship. I think it's
Yes.
what are we training ourselves to think, and this is where mindfulness, this is where meditation, this is where the practices where you think about how am I connecting with the good and the beautiful and the true, and not just for 2 minutes or 5 minutes a day, but if you think about I'm getting 3 or 4 hours of this content and I'm getting 10 minutes of this content, the
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 hours is going to be what is going to push into your mind intrusively more than the
Yeah.
10 minutes. So, think about how that impacts you and how what you put in your mind is going to affect your thoughts.
That's a great thought to close with. And it actually fits really perfectly with, I think, Paul, you were basically quoting it from Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think or meditate about such things. And so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, let's soak our minds in things that cultivate beauty and love and freedom so that our minds are less the congested traffic jam and more tranquil streams. I want that. I mean, yeah, when I say that, I'm like, yeah, I want more of that in my life. So, Laura, Paul, thank you so much for your thoughts and sharing your insights with us. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or thoughts or comments, please reach out. And in conclusion, as we always say, may God bless you and strengthen you as you do the work. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, we'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.